Hello, John Bloodworth Gentleman Crafter here with another adventure in machine embroidery. This time around in the Hatch Embroidery Digitizing software, I decided to just try out digitizing a sketched hibiscus flower, that's the one. But I wanted to try a few different things that have been on my mind for a while. So anyway, I'll explain as I go. I'm getting way ahead of myself. Now the first thing that I wanted to do was try and digitize this in the order that it would be stitched, I think. Well, maybe. But anyway, so I went for the Digitize Blocks tool first. And the reason that I used this one is because I wanted the stitching to follow the curvature and the flow of what I was digitizing. This one works by basically plotting out 3 points to give you, not 3 points, 4 points to give you your blocks each time. So you can see as I'm doing those lines that stretch across the stamen, it's basically creating a block formation. And this gives the software the information about the stitch direction. Once you've finished digitizing the blocks, you press enter to set that in place, and as you can see, that stitching now flows along the stamen. I think I'm happy with that. Now for the actual bits that stick out of the stamen, what I decided to do was use the freehand open shape tool to just loosely trace that design. In fact, no, I chose the Digitize Open Shape tool. And the reason for that, the reason for the change was because these were such small lines and circles, I wanted the ability to accurately plot straight corners and curved sections. With the freehand open shape tool, you're a little bit at the mercy of the tool itself, whereas with this you can be very, very specific. Now my screen recording software shows a different color ring for each click of the mouse depending on whether it's a right click or a left click. So the left click is in red and that gives me a straight corner, and the yellow circle is a right click and that gives me a curved node. That's the word. So you can see how I'm mixing those up to get the results that I'm getting. Hopefully it'll help if you're going to have a go with this software. Now as you can see, I am skipping a few. In all honesty, that was a mistake, but I'm not too bothered. I'm getting enough detail from what I'm putting down and what I'm plotting already, so should be fine. Now, although I said that I was going to do this in the order that it was going to be stitched, actually this will end up being stitched on top, so I will have to resequence afterwards. If you make a mistake, you can use the backspace to go back along the chain of nodes that you've plotted to the point where you're happy to carry on from, which is a godsend, rather than having to start all over again. And when you've finished, you press enter to set that in place and apply the stitching. I went with a triple run. And you can see there I resequenced that to go behind. Next job was to plot out some of the detail, like the veins on the petals. Excuse me. So I went for the freehand open shape tool, just for speed really. So I'm basically tracing up and then back down, having started in the center of the flower, and this way it's just much easier. Rather than having lots of starts and stops, this will stitch in one continuous motion. You can probably see as I work through this also what I meant earlier by being at the whim of the tool. Whilst the stitching does follow, it will also kind of intuitively create the stitching and the curve according to what the machine can do. So just keep that in mind. Might not be totally 100% accurate, but neither is this image. It's basically a sketch, so that's what we're doing, sketching. Sketching with stitches. And this is real time, I think. I do speed up a few sections here and there, but generally this is me working just probably noshing some biscuits as well. In fact, I did, but don't tell anyone. Okay, so again, if you use the reshape tool after you've finished, you can move individual points around if you want a little bit more accuracy. But I'm going to stick with it as it is. The next job would be to do the outside edge, the detail for that. But I'm not going to show you that because it's exactly the same. But here is what it looks like when it's done. This time I did jump between sections rather than have a continuous line. Next up, I want to digitize the petals, so I hid everything that I'd done already so it doesn't necessarily get all cluttered on screen. And then I'm using the Digitize Closed Shape tool, again for a little bit more accuracy over the freehand open shape tool. Same principle applies though, you've got sharp corners or rounded corners, depending on which mouse button you click. I'm working my way around the outer edge of that sketch, if you see what I mean. As in, I'm not going up the center of that dark line, I'm actually working around the outer edge. And the reason for this is because there is going to be a little bit of pull, so it may bring those stitches closer in. So I just wanted to compensate for that just a little bit in the positioning of the stitch. After selecting the shape, I went in to use the ripple stitch as I'd used last week, but I actually felt that the contour stitch would work much better for this particular design, so I chose it. Now again, I'm not going to show you the same thing for all the other 4 petals. Here's what it looks like after it's done though. Each petal was individually digitized. Now I just thought for being able to see it on screen, I just gave the detail stitches some colour that was different to the petals. And the stamen too. Now again, I hid everything so that it doesn't get too complicated or too messy on screen. And then changed my mind. The reason for that is because I was going to digitize the outline of the stamen, but then I remembered there is an outline creating tool within the toolbox of Hatch. So I just used that instead. Easy peasy, couple of clicks, job done. Now, coming up next, more fiddling. More hiding of stuff. And time to zoom in and get a bit serious about these outlines. Probably a bit too much. 500 or 600% is usually what you'd be at when you're digitizing, as that gives you a close enough view and also the ability to see what you're doing. Now I'm using the digitized blocks here again because again I want the stitching to follow the flow and direction of the outline. This did take some time because I'm basically plotting either side of that outline. So this is almost like creating a satin stitch around the edge of the petal, but I'm plotting each side of the satin stitch so that it can have different widths along its length. I hope that makes sense. So normally a satin stitch would have just a single width, but I wanted to be able to control the width along the entire length of that path, and that's why I'm using the digitized blocks. It's a very, very handy tool. Now don't worry, when I get to the end of this one I'm not going to show you all 5 as well because this does take some time, but I need to get to the end of this one to show you how to make sure that that stitch direction is set in place, because sometimes the software doesn't apply the direction, so you may need to manually add it yourself, which you can do. When you get to the end and you're happy, you just press enter to set that in place. Now it was set to outline, so I applied the fill, which was a satin stitch, and you can see it's all going one direction at the moment, and that's because there are no stitch angles applied. So I chose the tool and applied 3, thinking that I might get away with it. Actually no, 4. Thinking that I might get away with it, pressed enter, and you can see how the stitch angles are now changing along the length of that outline. 4 wasn't quite enough, so I went back in and added a bunch more. This is just really telling the software what angle you want the stitches to be at when it reaches that point, and it will work out the rest of it for you. There we go. Perfect. And you can adjust any one of those angles as well manually. So there we go, that's one outline done. And here are all 5 done. So let's take a look at all this stitching. I'll probably need to do some resequencing because I have stuffed that up. So all I'm doing there to do that is selecting whatever I need to move in the sequence panel on the right, or docker as it's called, and then moving it up and down. I am fiddling with a few bits of things like colours as I go. But basically here I'm just trying to make sure that the stitches that need to be on top are. Now Hatch has a top-down sequencing order, so whatever is at the top of the sequence docker will get stitched first. So all of that detail needs to go to the top, or at least below the outlines. That's what I meant. Now I changed the detail stitching along with the outlines to the same colour, as I thought a minimal colour scheme for this one would work really well. A couple of final fiddles. And I thought I would try adding a feather edge to those outline sections, just to really see what would happen. It's almost like colouring in, you know how you're scribbling from side to side. It's that, but with stitches. Some of them faced in, some faced out, so I had to make a few fiddly adjustments. Okay, I think I'm just about getting there. Not convinced about this grey and white colour scheme though, so I dug through my thread box and chose a few colours. In fact, two colours. Two colours very close to each other, 8-5 and 8-6. I decided to leave that stamen, the white of the stamen, exactly as it was, white. Kind of funky. Needs a little something extra though, so I decided to digitize a circular background behind it with a stipple single run stitch in a cool blue, like a Hawaiian sky. Once that was in place, and I'd made sure to select it, then I fiddled with the stitch spacing. Everything else seemed fine. That needed to go to the bottom of the stack though. Sorry, the top, because it needs to get stitched first. Ugh, come on, John. And then I decided to save out the design at this point. It's probably a good idea to save more frequently than I do, in case anything happens with your computer, but there you go. Exporting as a PES file, as I have a Brother embroidery machine, and then just using the stitch player to preview that design. What I did notice, however, was that there were potential jump stitches that were coming in here. So there was a bit more resequencing to do for me, so that things worked in the round rather than jumping all over the place. So by selecting the individual pieces, I could see which they are and where they needed to be in relation to the other bits. Sometimes turning off the true view helps as well. Now, what I'm doing here is just checking the start and stop points for each of those shapes as well. And rather than having to go across the screen, I totally forgot that the shortcut key was H. I remembered in the end, so you won't see me hitting the reshape icon much after this. So I'm just trying to make sure the start and stop points are in the center so that I don't get a lot of jump stitching. With the detail stitches, wasn't too bothered. I knew I was going to get jump stitches anyway, but I thought if the center stitched out first, then that would be good. And then obviously if the rest stitched out in sequence in the round, then that would also be good. Anyway, that's that done, and I sent it off to stitch. And there's the finished result. I hope you've enjoyed that little journey and will join me again next time.